This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one country, one leader, or one moment in time. What you are watching form quietly is a failure of insulation. A system designed to keep internal violence contained is starting to leak. And once that boundary goes, everything accelerates. There is a new rule being tested right now, not written down, not voted on, but understood. It says that what a government does to its own people may no longer stay inside its own borders, that certain actions flip a switch. And once that switch flips, distance stops protecting anyone. No speeches, no negotiations, just consequences that arrive from far away very fast. If this feels abstract, stay with me, because the danger here isn't noise, it's precision. And once the system learns that precision works, it doesn't unlearn it. If you want to understand where this goes next, you need to see how the rules quietly changed. What actually runs this system now is not ideology. It's thresholds, invisible lines, quiet permissions, calculated responses that activate when certain conditions are met. Power no longer waits for consensus. It waits for signals. When a state uses force internally, that action is no longer judged later, slowly, diplomatically. It is evaluated in real time, measured against predefined triggers, matched with tools already warmed up. This is not about outrage. It's about efficiency. Control has shifted away from parliaments, treaties, and public debate toward executive calibration, short sentences, clear warnings, binary outcomes. If X happens, Y follows. Not maybe, not someday. This removes friction. And friction is what used to slow disasters down. The system now rewards speed, clarity, and distance. Punishment without presence, force without occupation, decisions without reversal. This is why personalities don't matter as much as people think. The machinery works whoever is standing at the console. And once machinery replaces judgment, it keeps moving forward. Which brings us to the change most people missed because it didn't happen all at once. There was a time when internal violence followed a familiar script. Before a crackdown stayed domestic, before the outside world reacted later, carefully. After the fact, before force bought time. Now it buys exposure. The shift didn't announce itself. No doctrine, no vote, just normalization. Live video replaces official statements. Connectivity outruns censorship. A blackout is no longer silence. It's a signal. Before, distance protected decision makers. Now distance accelerates them. Before, governments could calibrate repression slowly, arrest here, intimidate there, stretching control across weeks and months. Now every action is time-stamped, counted, compared, and here's the dangerous part. Slow change feels safe because nothing explodes on day one. But systems don't collapse when they're loud. They collapse when incentives quietly flip, when restraint stops being rewarded, when speed becomes the advantage, when escalation looks cheaper than patience. Most people still think the old rules apply. They don't. The system has already moved on. And the first visible shock is never the real story. It's the warning light. Because once that light turns on, it doesn't turn itself off. And that brings us to the moment when abstraction became real. Then the shock arrived, not as a turning point, as a test. The system watched what happened when force was applied without ambiguity, when legal restraint was removed, when the response was immediate and visible. People died, including children, not many by historical standards, enough to matter. And that distinction is the tell, because the number wasn't the point. The reaction was courts announced outcomes before trials, violence was framed as necessity, and the message upward was simple: escalation is back on the table. But here's what changed. This time, the violence didn't disappear into delay. It didn't wait for reports. It didn't wait for summits. It triggered assessment, not moral outrage, calculation. What happens next if this continues? What thresholds get crossed? What responses are already unlocked? This is where people misunderstand what they're watching. They think this is the crisis. It isn't. This is a stress test. And the system is learning in real time what it can get away with. If you're still watching, don't blink now. Because the most important part is what happens between the blows. And that's where the mechanism reveals itself. Here's how the damage actually moves. Not through speeches, not through ideology, through cash flow and timing. This system survives on continuity. Money comes in, force goes out. Loyalty is rented, not earned. When revenue flows, repression is affordable. When it stutters, everything downstream destabilizes. That's why pressure doesn't aim at crowds first. It aims at arteries, interrupt the income, and the system faces choices it cannot delay. Pay the enforcers or fund the state. Maintain order or maintain solvency. And here's the part that's rarely said out loud. The people who absorb the damage are never the decision makers. They're the ones whose labor keeps the lights on, whose silence keeps the balance sheets intact. When that labor pauses even briefly, the illusion of control cracks. Not ideologically, operationally, because force is expensive. And hesitation spreads faster than orders. This is where the system becomes fragile, not because it's challenged, but because it has to keep working every single day. Miss one cycle, miss one payment, miss one assumption. And the machinery that looked solid starts making noise, which is exactly when speed takes over. Everything's sped up. Shorter decisions, harsher language, less room to reverse. The response was no longer calibrated for stability. It was calibrated for deterrence. Communications vanished, screens went dark, connections were cut not to hide weakness, but to slow momentum. That move used to work. This time, it didn't. Information leaked anyway. Fragments at first, then patterns. Images moved faster than orders. Visibility outran control. And here's the escalation people miss. Once the system fails to fully suppress information, every act of force multiplies its impact. Each strike doesn't quiet dissent. It advertises it. The response to that failure is always the same. More force, less restraint, fewer exits. This is the danger zone, where backing down looks fatal and pressing forward risks triggering something much larger. At this point, nobody is fully in control. Not the crowd, not the enforcers, not the people issuing commands from a distance. The system is moving on inertia. And inertia does not negotiate, which leaves only one question that actually matters. Who absorbs the next consequence? This is where it stops being abstract and becomes about you. Because systems like this don't break evenly. They transfer pressure downward. You feel it as instability before you recognize it as policy. Prices move. Energy tightens. Markets react before explanations arrive. You feel it as uncertainty. A sense that decisions are being made far away, faster than anyone can respond to them. That outcomes are being locked in before questions are even asked. You don't need to live inside the conflict for it to reach you. You just need to be connected to the systems that touch it. Trade, energy, information, security. This is how global shocks work now. They don't announce themselves. They ripple. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The people least responsible absorb the cost first. Always. If this feels unsettling, that's not an accident. That feeling is the warning. If you want to understand how this reaches beyond one place, beyond one moment, stay with me. Because the next phase doesn't respect borders. And once it spreads, it doesn't ask permission. What happens next is never contained. Because once a system proves that internal force can trigger external consequences, everyone starts watching everyone else. Not for intentions, for thresholds. Allies recalibrate, adversaries test edges, markets price and risk. That hasn't happened yet. This is how local crises become global behavior. Not through imitation. Through anticipation, states begin adjusting how much force they use, how quickly, how visibly, not based on domestic law, but on foreign reaction time. And here's the shift that matters. Deterrence is no longer mutual. It's observational. One crackdown becomes a data point. One response becomes precedent. The ripple moves outward. Energy routes tense. Supply chains hedge. Diplomacy shrinks into signals and warnings. No one announces this phase. It just arrives. And the most dangerous part is this. Once multiple systems start operating this way, restraint stops looking like stability. It starts looking like vulnerability. That's when uncertainty hardens into posture. And posture turns into alignment, not because anyone wants escalation, but because no one wants to be the last one to react. And that leaves us standing at a fork before acceleration locks in. From here, the system has three paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. Pressure is absorbed. Signals are recalibrated. Violence is modulated just enough to stay below the tripwire. The system survives thinner, more cautious, more brittle than before. Stable on the surface, tense underneath. The second is erosion. Each incident pushes the threshold a little further. What once triggered response becomes tolerated, then normalized. The warning lines blur. Deterrence loses clarity. And violence grows not in bursts, but in background levels that never quite recede. The third is rupture. That's when the calculation fails. When a single decision crosses a line that was never meant to be tested. When speed outruns control. When retaliation arrives without pause, without presence, without an exit. Rupture doesn't look like chaos at first. It looks like efficiency, clean strikes, clear statements, no ambiguity, until the system realizes it can't reverse what it set in motion. The danger isn't which path is chosen, it's that the choice may no longer belong to anyone. Because once acceleration takes over, intent becomes irrelevant. Only momentum remains. And momentum does not care what anyone hoped would happen. This is where I stop short on purpose. Because the most dangerous systems don't announce their breaking point. They normalize it. They teach everyone involved to treat acceleration as competence, distance as safety, speed as control. And once that lesson sets in, it spreads quietly. From one crisis to the next, from one government to another. From one screen to yours, nothing here resolves cleanly. There is no off-ramp that restores the old rules. No reset that puts violence back behind borders and decisions back on a calendar. What you're watching is a world learning how to punish without occupying, to intervene without committing, to respond without owning the aftermath. That doesn't end with one place. It doesn't end with one administration. It doesn't end when the footage fades. If you stop here, you miss what happens when this logic is applied again and again by people who watch this moment closely. So don't treat this as a story you've finished. Treat it as a system you've just noticed. Because once you see it, you start recognizing it everywhere. And in the next video, we need to talk about who benefits when this becomes the default and who doesn't get a choice. Stay with me.